First off, Gero, big congrats to your recently announced seed round, co-led by our friends at Balderton and Sharvin Ventures. 8.3 million seed round, very impressive. So let's quickly talk about what you actually do at Levity, and connecting to what we discussed actually earlier, this mental model that we presented with Aleph Alpha in terms of these generative AI models, where you have the foundation layer and all of the groundwork to really build and train these kind of generative models, and then you have the application layer. And I think Levity really fits more into the application layer. So tell us, what do you actually do?
Yeah, so with Levity, we enable non-technical users and organizations to build their own AI-powered workflow automations to automate a variety of processes. So on the application layer, we play basically as a pretty horizontal platform, covering a wide range of potential use cases. Pretty much any use case that involves some sort of unstructured data, like text, images, or documents. And we integrate with a lot of tools, so like Gmail, Outlook, Google Drive, wherever the data comes from and needs to go through, and then like some business logic in between. So typical use cases would be classifying customer support tickets by sentiment, by topic, by urgency, according to a company's own individual preferences or processes, or recognizing email attachments and putting them in the right cloud systems or folders, classifying and tagging incoming emails, and a lot more. And as you can imagine, there's a few use cases we see very often. And then there can also be very, very exotic use cases, like a customer of ours is, for example, using Levity to classify microscopy images and identifying whether there's warm eggs in dog poop or not. So this is like a pretty exotic one, and not a very common one. But we cover that as well. So it's a fully horizontal tool to put the power of AI at the fingertips of any non-technical knowledge worker.
And speaking about the power of AI, so there is obviously very often a question of make versus build, make versus buy. And how did you decide on this question in terms of leveraging existing state-of-the-art models which are already out there, published, potentially open source, versus building that in-house? How did you think about that?
Yeah, so I think what's really great about the AI industry in general is how collaborative it is and how much good stuff is out there from an open source standpoint. So there's very, very few companies, maybe like Aleph Alpha or OpenAI by now, who kind of keep their own code to themselves and who don't open source it. But there's a lot of stuff out there that really allows you to build powerful AI models based on open source models. And so we think more about where do we create IP. We think more about it like, okay, we have to build machine learning pipelines that generalize very well across customer use cases and across data types, but we don't have to build our own models and algorithms from scratch. We can use existing open source technologies and kind of fine-tune those models and set them up in a way so that they just work in the best way possible on average across all of our customers' use cases and our user base.
Yeah, so it's really about the productization and thinking from a customer's perspective, how to actually leverage the technology, but it's really not the core to build this technology, but more on building a nice product that actually has a good UX for the customer, right? And on this UX for the customer and building the product, so you spoke about a variety of use cases out there. How can you make sure to get all of that done with one tool? Or do you build different interfaces for the customers? How did you decide how to build the product?
Yeah, great question. I totally agree. I think in the end, for us, the challenge is really how can we build an interface that is super easy to understand for every person that finds our website, creates an account, logs in, and starts to build something. How can we make them understand what's possible and give them the right tools to build something? And so in that sense, how did we get there? So I think we can't do everything, right? Like AI is a wide field, and there's things like image segmentation, object detection, and a lot more than that. And we can't cover everything. So for now, we are very focused on classification tasks because they tend to be the entry point to workflows. Like when a new email comes in, the first thing that a person handling that email inbox would do is read it and figure out what it's generally about before you decide where to put it, where to reply, what to say, and so on and so forth. And so we think about AI in the process as there are certain tasks that a human has to do, like opening that email and reading it, understanding it, and, for example, applying the right category so that in your mental model, okay, this is an investor email, so now maybe I want to reply with like a specific message like, hey, okay, interested in having a call next week. Or if a customer messages you, you will apply a different pattern in your head. And so we as a software, we need to give users the ability to automate these kind of decisions. And so in that sense, for example, we call those AI blocks, and we have 3 types of AI blocks at the moment. AI blocks for text classification, image classification, and document classification. And so it's really about this classification task in a process that usually the human needs to handle. And this is also, for example, where like a Zapier or a Make would end and a Levity would start, because with these more traditional automation tools, when there's unstructured data involved, these processes tend to break because unstructured data is there and it can't be processed in an automated way without a human handling it.
Yeah, no, it makes lots of sense. And like ultimately, it's a productivity tool for knowledge workers, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And thinking about different productivity tools, so if we as an investor look at the market, we've seen lots of development in terms of their go-to-market strategies, and many of the productivity companies actually start with a product-led growth, so PLG. How do you think about PLG versus traditional enterprise sales for your solution and market?
So I think it really comes down to, if you want to be a PLG product company, that's a very fundamental decision. You need to actively make it, and if you make it, there's lots of things you need to consider that with a more traditional top-down sales motion, you don't. Like, how do you manage, self-service onboarding? How do you make users understand within the first couple of seconds or minutes on the platform how they have to use it, what they can do with it, and you really have to kind of work on a lot of different fronts to optimize user activation once they signed up, and then also manage them actively within the product through drip campaigns that kind of nudge them to get going, maybe if they've been inactive for a couple of days, to eventually drive them to the point where they will convert. If you have a more traditional sales motion, you'll get the signature before implementation starts, and then the customer's already in, right? Then you just need to make it work. And so in that sense, I think PLG has a lot more potential if done right, because it's infinitely more scalable, and you won't need an army of salespeople to get paying customers and to kind of scale that up. But it's, I would say, on the product side of things, more difficult to build. And so we decided to be a product-led growth product because we believe that in order to really democratize this technology for non-technical users, we have to build a platform that is, on the one side, accessible and affordable for smaller companies, mid-sized companies, not just for the Fortune 500 or high-tech startups. And in that sense, we also figured out that in order to reach these people, and with the kind of ACVs we'd be talking about, it's not feasible to have a salesperson on every single account, basically.
Yeah, no, that makes lots of sense. And connecting to the earlier panel with Aleph Alpha and generative AI, so what do you think is the impact of generative AI on a product like yours?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a huge breakthrough, and I've been playing around quite a lot with GPT chat recently.
If you haven't done, you should do it. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. It's really kind of, it feels like magic, a little bit like mind-boggling in a way. I think what we see though is that although it has a lot of potential, in most customer cases, like a generative model that kind of works in a zero-shot way wouldn't really just work on its own. Like usually what we see in customer cases is they are very specific and they need to be fine-tuned, and these generative models, they are way too big to be fine-tunable in a kind of an economical sense. So like smaller models, like transformer models that we can fine-tune, they tend to work a lot better. But I think there are use cases where these generative models can make a lot of sense. And so for example, in our product, when a user uploads new data, for example, what we do is we apply like a zero-shot clustering to give the user an idea of like what are the types of data points that the user just uploaded, so that the user can decide whether he wants to use these labels or not, and shift around data. There's also all of the use cases like generating texts, sending out emails maybe automatically or just with a human approval, so that the human doesn't have to type the email themselves, but rather just approve what the AI wrote. So I think there's a lot of potential for us also to incorporate these generative models, but for customer cases, like for example, one of our customers is using Levity to classify photos that users upload in a sales process. They are a solar company, and users need to upload their basically photos of their house from the outside, their roof from the outside, their electricity meter, their last electricity bill, and so on and so forth. And then if they upload a house from the outside, basically what they needed to do previously manually is figuring out what kind of roof type does the house has. Is it like a flat roof? Is it like a spike roof? Is it like a tilted roof? Whatever. And that depends on whether they are able to sell their solar panels or not. And so, for example, now they can do that in a fully automated way because Levity is part of that process. Whenever a new photo gets uploaded, we automatically process it real time. And with a generative model, they are not yet at a point where they can understand these nuances that can be very, very business specific, very, very process specific. And so, this fine-tuning is crucial.
So essentially your platform and product is more plug and play in terms of technology. So you can include new approaches, new state-of-the-art models, which then power or add to the power of your product, right?
Exactly. I mean, we don't have to be religious about what kind of models we use or what kind of architectures we use. We can swap it out if we realize there's something new that's better for some use cases. We have a lot of, customer data and models behind the scenes already. So when something new gets published, can just test, hey, on our current user base, if we train all of these AI blocks on a different architecture, would it perform better on average? And if yes, then, maybe we can change it out, or we can even offer users to kind of just train multiple models at the same time, and we on the back end kind of take whatever model performs best. And so in that sense, we can be very flexible and open about figuring out what makes sense for us as a platform, what kind of architectures do we want to incorporate, and we are not kind of very focused or stiff on one specific kind of architecture or model.
Cool. Super interesting. I think time is over. Thanks a lot for the good conversation, Gero.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.